My name is Yonah Schiller. I'm the executive director here at Tulane Hillel. I want to just really thank all of you for coming tonight. Obviously, it's a very important issue that impacts us all. So it's wonderful to see so many people here who care about the issue and took the time to come, as well as all the panelists who will be formally introduced by the moderator, who I will introduce. But I want to also thank the Hillel staff, our COO, Liza Sherman, her partners, Anik Brand, Kira Wortman, who really put this all together, as well as our the Big Issue Steering Committee, and their names are listed on the piece of paper that you're probably now sitting on. So this is Tulane Hillel. We function here on Tulane's campus, but we also function independently in the city, and we host various functions and activities that are meaningful for not only campus life, but also our city, the New Orleans community. The goal of this series, the Big Issue series, is to highlight pressing issues. This is one of many many events that we've run as part of the series, and these issues impact us all as citizens of New Orleans, as citizens of the world. All of the issues range from cultural, political, and all things that impact the lives of people in our community. Our goal is to provide a platform for people to be heard, for knowledge and experience to be shared in a respectful but yet honest way, with the hope that we achieve a better understanding of the issues and hopefully some direction and motivation to act, so this doesn't become just an academic exercise, but it happens in real time. And in doing so, we all become, in our own way, part of the solution. Gentrification in New Orleans. The question of progress and growth, its impact, and what we as a community need to consider and come to terms with and give voice to is a topic in front of us this evening. Now, the content of this dialogue certainly will be informative and most likely charged. Yet, in honesty, our greatest challenge as our community is to hear one another. It is to empathize with one another, no matter where they may lie on the spectrum of opinion. Our ability to engage in discourse and not descend into argument will be the thing that allows us to actually find solutions, to build our future together, in New Orleans. That is our intention, and I now am going to entrust you with the same intention. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Stephanie Grace. Stephanie Grace is a columnist with the New Orleans Advocate, focusing on state and local politics. She's been writing an opinion column about campaigns, election, and government since 2003, first at the Times-Picayune, and since 2013 at the Advocate. Grace joined the Picayune in 1994 as a reporter. She previously worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Los Angeles Times, and CBS News. She's a native of Needham, Massachusetts, and a graduate of Brown University, where she did not know Bobby Jindal. And Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Stephanie, we're really excited for you to be here. It's probably the hardest job in the house this evening. You're going to do a great job, and she will formally introduce the rest of our panelists. Thank you all for coming. Make sure you signed up. You'll hear about the other series in the future, and make sure you all eat the rest of the food before you leave, if it's not already gone.
Okay, again, can you hear me, for one thing? Okay, great. I sound kind of funny to myself here, but that's okay. First of all, there are two precious chairs up here if anybody wants to try to sneak up and grab them. Again, we've never had a response like this on one of our panels. It certainly speaks to how important people think this issue is and how much they want to talk about it, which is fantastic. So I really want to thank everybody for coming, everybody who's here, who's watching live upstairs, watching at home. Thank you for your interest and your involvement. New Orleans is living through what's been called a great urban revival, but it's also raised questions over equity, New Orleans' essential character, and other things. Gentrification is a loaded term, but these are complex, nuanced issues, and we've got a great group of people here to share their perspectives. So let me introduce them. Although I think the first lady to my left might need no introduction, probably people recognize her. LaToya Cantrell is the, everybody? Yes? The city council member from District B, serving her second term, first full term. She's a native of Los Angeles who came to New Orleans to study at Xavier and stayed, like a lot of us do. Professionally, she worked in the nonprofit world, and at the time of Katrina, she was head of the Broadmoor Improvement Association, which is when a lot of us first learned of her work, because, of course, Broadmoor was heavily flooded, and it was one of the areas in that first mayoral redevelopment commission identified as an area that might possibly not be rebuilt. And that really, the famous green dot map, for those of you who are here. And that really spurred the association to action, and it has really become a model in neighborhood, I was going to say, organization and redevelopment, and really just taking things into their own hands and self-determination. As I said, she's been on the city council since 2012. You might know her, you've probably heard that she was the author of the Smoking Ordinance, which got a lot of press. Beyond that, she is the chair of the Community Development Committee and has really focused on housing and development. And she's also co-chair of the mayor's transition committee, actually, back when he was first elected, the Neighborhood Development Task Force. To her left is Flozell Daniels, who is the president and CEO of the Foundation for Louisiana, which was originally the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, founded after Katrina. People around Tulane might know him because he used to work here. He worked in state and local affairs. He was executive director, and he's also worked at City Hall under Mayor Mark Morial. And so he's at the Louisiana Foundation, the Foundation for Louisiana, which is dedicated to really reducing vulnerability and building sustainable communities in Louisiana. And he's involved in a working group that's looking at the issues we're going to talk about tonight, so he'll tell us about that. To his left, Vance Frockerson, another, I should say, Flozell is a native New Orleanian, as is Vance. Vance is a native of his family business in the 7th Ward. He grew up in Gentilly, actually. You may recognize him from Jazz Fest, where you may have bought sausage from him. It's delicious. You may have seen him singing with his cousin John Butte. Again, old New Orleans. He's a graduate of Morehouse College, and he's here because, we invited him here because he is involved in developing something called Sacred Heart at St. Bernard, which is a new development in the 7th Ward on St. Bernard Avenue. It's right above Claiborne Avenue, and it's a mixed income commercial development in partnership with some nonprofits, Providence Community Housing, Columbia Residential, Urban Focus Louisiana. And the idea really is to, the way he's described it, to help people from the neighborhood come back and live there during this time of intense change. And finally, Renya Ehrenfreut, did I get that right? Another California native, is associate professor and department chair of the Planning and Urban Studies Department at University of New Orleans. And she's done research on, obviously, urban planning and has written papers, actually, on gentrification, and has taken a particular look at young professionals in New Orleans and who've come to New Orleans and to work in the rebuilding, and how they have attempted to kind of integrate into New Orleans. She has a PhD in urban planning from the University of California, Los Angeles. She has a master's in urban planning from the University of Washington, and a bachelor's degree from the University of California at Santa Barbara. And I should say, I'm sorry I skipped this, Flozell is a graduate of UNO and has an MBA from Tulane also. So I'd like to start by basically asking each of the panelists to spend a few minutes talking about their work in the area of redevelopment, gentrification, kind of what their angle is, what their take is on it. So LaToya, can we start with you?
Okay, sure. I'm on. Good evening, and thank you for having this event tonight, talking about a topic that I think we should have been talking about this long time. I got involved in this work really in just community redevelopment in the post-Katrina environment, particularly serving on the city council. I just, through the years, have seen an issue with no real focus on affordable housing and what's happening at the neighborhood level. And when you think about gentrification, it has to be at the neighborhood level to really get a feel and sense what's happening. The city of New Orleans, if we just look over the time from 1982, 12% of people's income was going towards rent. But now it's at 35% of our people's income is going towards rent. Rents are through the roof. And at one point, you know, this was a place you can live in your community, you could afford to work within the hospitality industry even, which drives our economy here. But now our cultural bearers, as I call it, our musicians, our chefs, our hospitality employees are being priced out of communities that they've been able to live in literally for generations. So by focusing on this, just trying to deal with the issue overall, where's the plan, City of New Orleans, as it relates to this matter? Looking at also rental registry that we need to deal with, slum properties, and also just quality housing for everyone, for renters. Also looking at inclusionary zoning in the comprehensive zoning ordinance. So that's something we're working on right now, wanting to get that in there. And in addition to that is just really trying to push city government to come up with a plan of action as to how we're going to, at the neighborhood level, really feel what people are dealing with and where we're seeing the changes happening in our neighborhoods, and particularly communities that are majority African American, that were also in this post-Katrina environment, screwed by road home, so, you know, filled with blight. And then, of course, rents through the roof. So there's a real need for us to look at these matters as we look at redevelopment, and we need that, but it has to be balanced, and it has to be revitalizing communities for all, and not just a few.
Okay, Flozell?
What she said.
That was easy.
That makes sense. I think I'll quickly tell you guys, the work of the foundation, as Stephanie indicated, started in the disaster recovery context. We had the privilege of working with nonprofit partners and leaders across Louisiana, particularly in this community, to look at the sort of critical issues that we were facing. Housing was chief among them. So it wouldn't surprise you that we were able to make millions of dollars of investments, leveraging public resources and other private dollars to expand opportunity to more than 12,000 families for safe and affordable housing, both home ownership and rental. The mission at the Foundation for Louisiana remains investing in people and practices that reduce vulnerability and that strengthen communities. And we take people and practices seriously. And so the manifestation of that work most recently includes our Equity Caucus, which is a part of our leadership development and our public policy practice, where we seek to make investments in people and practices that expand public policy opportunities to create equity and inclusion for communities. The last cohort decided in the housing space that they were really interested in pursuing a housing plan for the city of New Orleans. As we approach the 10-year commemoration of Katrina, the question they asked Councilwoman was, isn't this the time and the opportunity for us to come together, nonprofit and private developers, public advocacy groups, fair housing people, residents in the community, and those of us who care about community development, to develop a plan with each other, with the public sector, that allows us to do a couple of really important things. Engage people in the discussion about how do we leverage diminishing public dollars to get greater outcomes from an equity and inclusion perspective. And how do we begin to build policy infrastructure to answer a question that we historically have not had to answer? For 3 generations in New Orleans, we have seen people leave this community. And suddenly, and you'll hear more about this, we have people coming into the city, 8, 9, 10,000 people a year, and we are really struggling to deal with what it means for neighborhoods. How do we take advantage of that as an opportunity a sign of a revitalizing city, and recognize that it's also harming and diminishing folks who are from here. And it also exposes another issue that I think we have to talk about tonight, and that is the broadening economic inequality that's driving so much of these challenges. Yeah.
Thank you. Vance.
Yes, good evening. I'm a sausage maker. I was someone who, hello, testing, 1, 2.
Are you on?
That's okay.
Hey.
I have a loud enough voice, I'll just raise my volume. I was a frustrated resident of the city of New Orleans and of the 7th Ward of New Orleans, a very rich and very, thank you, a very rich and a very special place in my lifespan as to the cultural significance of the people of heritage that I belong, the Creole culture. My family has existed and done commerce and business in the 7th Ward for over 3 generations. My grandfather was a butcher by trade. My father was a butcher by trade. I'm a sausage maker who's learning to cut meat. But in trying to come back to the 7th Ward post-Katrina, especially having been there before Katrina and seeing the challenges to redevelop this precious piece of land that has contributed so much to the history of the entire city of New Orleans, to find some type of investment, some type of growth in this area that has given so many great persons of literature, music, politics, but yet to see so many other parts of the city developed over this stagnant area. It frustrated me for years. There were so many incentives laden upon the St. Bernard, Claiborne, Broad Street area from the state, local, and federal level that just never could gain momentum. And I saw the infrastructure, the speaking to the Bell South repairman saying, oh, this area, this is the worst wiring in the city. Well, they're not going to invest in it because the tax base and the people paying the bills, they just don't have enough money coming through this area. Same thing with Entergy. Then to see Katrina happen, wipe me out, wipe out a lot of my family and other people in the area. And then we try to struggle to come back. And it was just one failure after another to try to come back and rebuild my business. I found out that I didn't have the proper insurance. They had flood exclusions. I found out that I couldn't apply for road home because of family members who had interest in the business that were going to tie me up. I learned a lot in terms of business crisis development planning on the fly. But what I saw was a community that was coming back, slowly but surely. But it wasn't those that had lived there for so long. It was new people that saw a vision in the community that were coming in, that were investing in the old housing stock, that was redeveloping the neighborhoods, that were coming into an area that was so rife with crime. If you remember, the 7 Ward hardheads had scared everyone to where they didn't even leave their house at night. But now we had a new vision. We had a new energy that was coming in the area. And all I wanted to do was come back. So I had to think outside the box. I couldn't get the money to fix my business, but I saw examples of it happening. So I decided to talk for 4 years and found some people that were interested in my vision and trying to find some way to bring back commercial property as well as bring in some multi-income housing. And that's why I'm here today, to tell you my story and answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Vance. Renya.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and talking about gentrification. I certainly think this is something we need to be talking about more. And I think I share with everyone else who's speaking this perspective that when we're talking about gentrification, we're not simply talking about neighborhood change, and that we're talking about our understanding and knowledge that not everyone has the same opportunities, that change can lead to greater inequities and inequality, and that's the discussion in gentrification. I teach at University of New Orleans and also do research in areas around how cities change. And as Stephanie mentioned, I have done a research project with my colleague Marla Nelson, who is actually here in the audience this evening. And it was kind of a project that really looked at and spoke to many people who came or who were working in recovery jobs after in 2007, 2008, during that period. Many people were newcomers. Others were people who were from New Orleans, had left, came back to be part of this resurgence, and other people had been here throughout, had been working in New Orleans, were back in New Orleans. And we were really kind of asking this question on how people saw this and what did they see also as being these people who were seen as the hope of the city. If during that period there was a lot of talk about really celebrating newcomers, not celebrating people who are working so hard to come back, but this real emphasis on newcomers. And then we've continued this work, but that's only one area that's a piece of it. Marla Nelson and I also do work on how cities grapple with population loss and vacant land. And so this is another piece of this, of course, because we're talking about many neighborhoods that had experienced some disinvestment, people leaving for decades, and then suddenly the neighborhoods are changing. And one of the real questions there is, how do we rebuild neighborhoods in ways, like all neighborhoods, not only the ones that attract newcomers, but really build that strength. But I also want to mention another piece that I think is a very important piece of like a component of gentrification, because affordability is huge, and I think we cannot talk about it enough. Are we really creating neighborhoods that everybody has space in? But there's another way that people feel, or there are many other ways that people belong or don't belong. And I do, the other area I do work in is around public space activities and sort of how we negotiate our kind of diverse public environments. And one thing that we see as neighborhood change and in areas that we consider gentrifying is newcomers often have different ways of life. And they come in and do different things. They call the police about different things. Suddenly this, a bar on the corner that's had live music for years suddenly is too loud in the weekdays. And the police are being called about these kinds of things. And so there's a lot of other ways that neighborhoods change. And I think equally important, as we really talk about this question on, that it's, that we are of course talking about how places change, but we all know that places change all the time. And so really, like, how are we creating communities that, that everybody, has claim to, is welcome in and actually, can live in as they would like. And I think that's really the question.
Thank you so much. That was a great segue into my first question, which is about the word gentrification, the term that we throw around a lot. I've heard each of you use in different contexts, in newspaper interviews and conversations. And my first question is really, what are we talking about when we talk about gentrification? What's the definition? Is it a value-neutral term? Is it necessarily good or bad? Are we talking about amenities or culture, class, race, housing? And I guess an amendment to that would be, is it a zero-sum game? Are there necessarily winners and losers?
Do anyone?
Flozell?
I think there are technical definitions, right? It's measurable increases in income in a community, measurable increases in the valuation of land and property, significant and measurable changes in the demographics of a community, particularly, if you will, around race and class and what that looks like. But I do believe it's not just about what you can measure. We've been having some discussions with community members and with researchers and policy people for a few years on this issue, and one of the things we consistently struggle with is the lack of quality data on how people are experiencing and feeling about this gentrification and what this looks like. And so it's really difficult to get data on that. I think one of the things that we hope to get more into detail and to engage people about in this housing NOLA process, this plan that will be forthcoming. I should make a pitch, by the way. There is a summit this Saturday at historic A.L. Davis Park that is sort of a public kickoff with this working group of residents and others who are working on this. We really hope you guys can come out and be a part of that conversation. But I think, to Vance's point, for those of us who grew up in this community and had a way of having a lived experience and a way of thinking about community wisdom, the way people are talking about this is that their lives are changing. People used to be able to live near their family. And so even if they weren't rich, they had family supportive sort of mechanisms and ways to live with each other that enriched their lives. People at one point could work in close proximity to where their jobs were. And so it reduced transportation costs and made it easier for them to raise their kids and to live their lives. And we're finding in some of these transitional neighborhoods that's no longer the case. And it's having an impact on their lives. And it is also diminishing wealth. And this is really important, and I'll keep saying this, beyond the rental discussion, which is critical, when we talk about home ownership and the fact that most people build wealth in this country by way of land and property, and the increasing difficulty of middle-class folks to buy in neighborhoods where they can grow equity, where they can have safer and sort of wealthier dispositions for them and their families and something to hand down and pass down, I think is becoming almost impossible in this city, and it's something that we need to address.
Anyone else? Rania?
I would say that I think that the answer to the question, is it a neutral term, would be no. So I think with the, when we start talking about gentrification, in most cases, what we're doing is acknowledging that there are tensions around it. And some of the are very much around this, kind of increase in kind of value and cost of real estate or kind of rentals in a neighborhood. The fact that, oftentimes if we see like incomes increasing in a neighborhood, it's not because residents who had been living there for a long time have, more resources. It's that they're, the newcomers have higher incomes. And so that we see these kinds of changes. But I think the other piece that's really important is I think that it really is important that we're sort of talking about this because that we're trying to grapple with the inequality within this process. And I think that that's a really important piece of it. I would also say that I do think a lot of it is about resources and income, but that the term itself is racialized. I mean, people really envision a neighborhood changing, being predominantly African American to becoming predominantly white. When we look at some of the cities like Washington, D.C., which a lot of attention because really high increases in property values, but it was a majority African American city. It's now a majority white city. And so I do think, the implications of this, and if we believed everybody had, perfect opportunity and could, get housing where they wanted and, were mobile and all these were, opportunities by choice, I don't think we'd be having this discussion.
Yeah, but I agree, but I also believe that, I believe gentrification is different totally from redevelopment, and that redevelopment can happen without gentrifying the fabric of a community. But I believe that we have to be intentional. So when we're seeing what's going on, there's policies that we need to put forth to stop it. What I'm seeing, and I get real frustrated about this. When I talk about policy, I mean, we have this code enforcement piece, right, throughout our city and in communities. We know them, it's being revitalized. Turn around, people are moving in, which is great. We should be able to allow people to move in, and our old folks, people who've been in the community should also be able to stay. But what I've seen is that all of a sudden, some of our seniors around, or even some of our homeowners, somehow code enforcement is on them just a little bit strong. And the 70-year-old lady is getting these fines for shutters because of paint peeling. And then the next thing I know, she strapped herself to her house so she can fix her shutters to stop the pressure. But they're feeling the pressure. And when we're not intentional, the pressure comes. But if we are intentional, then we will really provide for case management and to see what's going on with Miss Sally. So we can help Miss Sally stay in her home so she's not pressured to sell, because that's also what's happening throughout our communities. It's not all, right, but I'm just saying that it is happening. So with this and other cases, it requires us, particularly government, I think, to be intentional. The city of New Orleans has a millage. It's the Neighborhood Investment Fund. It's a 30-year millage, started right in the 90s. I think it's about 7 years on the millage we have to use the money. It's supposed to be tied to affordable housing. Well, right now, that millage is paying for a lawyer in code enforcement and also someone in code enforcement. But the ordinance says that it's supposed to be a strategic plan in place around affordable housing and that money, a millage that people are paying. But right now, there's no plan, hasn't been approved by the council as the ordinance says. So right now, the council can't do its job or isn't doing its job because the ordinance isn't being followed by the administration. So these are opportunities. This is only one.
That's right.
Only one of many. But these, if we're being intentional, let's take resources that we know are supposed to create balance in neighborhoods that we're seeing change and create that balance and help everyone not only move in, but those who want to stay. And that's what I'm hoping this conversation will move us towards that action. Because it's not too late in the city of New Orleans. I don't want you to feel that way. It's not too late. We're seeing real redevelopment, and we need to take action before we do see gentrification. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing in terms of redevelopment. But when we get to gentrifying, it can be negative. And we don't have to allow that to happen.
You know, it's amazing. Gentrification has been happening since the Roman Empire. This is not a new concept. I mean, the Romans was displacing their own people. But I find that, and I'm going to speak more on the 7th Ward because you speak about what you know and what I saw and the history of that area. It was a pendulum. At one time, the 7th Ward was one of the most multi-ethnic communities in the city. You had Irish. You had where the corner stores now are Arab and Asian run. They were run by Italian immigrants. They were, you had people who were neighbors who influenced each other's culture. And you had a stabilized environment where people actually knew each other and actually had a community. I mean, I tell people all the time, I say, how do you think Creoles got pine-aid meat?
Right.
We got pine-aid meat because those wonderful Italians came in our neighborhood and made breaded veal, and we fell in love with that, and Italian sausage. They made hot sausage. I mean, they influenced our culture. That's why we buy Progresso Italian seasoned breadcrumbs when we make them. But you got to only know where we're going by knowing where we've come from. Mm-hmm. And it's a particular part of that culture. You know, people, it's amazing. I don't know how many of you are gentries in here, because that's the name they call you when you are gentrifiers. But when in the 7th Ward, we had people who were trying to just deal with not only who we're living with, but our own identity. Because in the history line, we were dealing with a different caste system than a lot of other places we're dealing with in the country. We were dealing with French Creoles, white residents. Then we had Creoles of color. And then you had dark-skinned Creoles who were all trying to live together. But then when society decided to change rules, tell free people of color they couldn't vote anymore, tell people that the one-drop rule, you got to all come together and change your laws and rules, and all of these things happen to these people over time, you develop a history of distrust. So as time comes in, and after while you had a big, vibrant community with the most beautiful thoroughfare on Claiborne Avenue, and then 5 white men made a decision to not put the interstate on the river, let's put it down Claiborne and destroy all of those wonderful oaks. And then they destroyed a neighborhood. And they left it to the rot. Yeah. And all of a sudden, post-Katrina, we get the livable Claiborne corridor study. We get all of these people interested in, I need to get a study on what's going on, how we can improve this. But you can't think that everybody's going to fall for the okie doke. You can't think that we don't see how the area is being tendered for development. And one of the reasons that I said, you know, here we have a place, I'm seeing the beginning of gentrification. I'm seeing the bohemians and the artists move in and settle among the people and say, hey, I can live in this area. And then people are starting to see, wow, these places are changing. But then we're starting to see people actually get interested in our area. We're seeing Ferret Street develop. We're seeing, that's your area.
Mm-hmm. That's my area.
That's your area.
All right. I grew up there, you know.
Well, he grew up on Ferret and Robin, so I had to give him a little play. And then you had Aretha Castle Hale, the old Dryads. Mm-hmm. I remember riding around those neighborhoods saying, what the wasteland looked like Detroit. I hope nobody from Michigan takes it. But now I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I'm gonna get my business back. I get no assistance. Banks fail in 2008, I believe. Mm-hmm. I'm lost. So I had to think out the box. And I had people that say, why don't you try to do something that a lot of these developers are doing? They're not even using their own money. And Dwayne Boudreaux of the Circle Food Store, who had this iconic business that everybody was pulling at his coattails, man, when are you coming back? Because that was a symbol of resurgence in the 7th Ward. If the Circle came back, the 7th Ward could come back. So he was like, man, I'm gonna go broke if I try to do this by myself. But luckily, he went and talked to Burger and Company, Dow Burger, and he said, look, can you help me find a way? Dow Burger decided to do a third-party development deal. Helped him get his historical designation, helped him get his credits, helped him get his new market credits, helped him work with the city to get the fresh food initiative, to build the financing necessary to pull it off, and he did. And I found out the other day that Burger did that pro bono. So I said, well, I'm gonna start talking. I'm gonna start having conversations. I'm gonna start knocking on doors. I called Providence Community Housing, and I said, look, there's this big lot of land that's sitting in our neighborhood. Sacred Heart School used to be on. That was a symbol of the first church that the Archdiocese of New Orleans forcibly segregated. They separated the church by color. And yet when white flight kicked in, school didn't have any need any more people to service it, so they left it. Closed the church, turned down the school, burned down, not burned down, the church burned down, rebuilt it. They tore down the school, and they left us with a wonderful lot that the only way it was used was thankfully the Autocrat Club across the street could have some parking. Mm-hmm. So Providence said, you know, we looked at that. We looked at that for some scatter site housing. Said, what you think we can do? I said, we need some affordable housing in this neighborhood. Because from what I'm seeing, we're not gonna have it. Our people that lived in this area, the musicians, the plasterers, the cooks, not the chefs, because this city was built on cooks. It wasn't until the Brennans brought these chefs to define what Creole cooking was. So I started talking, and then we said, well, we need somebody else. So we got Sandy Stroud with Urban Focus to kind of help teach us how to put it together. And then Columbia Park was brought in to stabilize the St. Bernard development, which is still in flux. We still don't know if it's successful yet, but it's in a good place now. And we started this journey. I didn't know anything. I learned on the fly. But I said, you know what? I got to try. Because if I don't or if someone else doesn't, someone's going to see the value at some point, come in, and next thing you know, we're going to be told what's going to be there.
That's right.
That's right.
And so now, we're in the middle of it. We had to put the cart before the horse because the CZO was going to change the zoning. I had to go ahead and try to get my zone application so we could keep something of that type in the neighborhood. Because the CZO was only going to let something of a fourplex. Was going to disallow for any commercial development in that area. All these old businesses would have a hard time coming back. So that was what I saw as a resident, as someone who generationally lived in the area. I had to do something. Now, it still could blow up in my face. I don't know. But as long as someone sees someone stepping up, if I drop the flag, I hope somebody else, a resident, a concerned citizen, or an educated Tulane graduate, come up and say, I'm going to invest in this area and pick up the flag and charge up that hill.
Is that me? No. But let me just pick up on something Vance is saying, because this is important. we tend to have these discussions from a social justice and community perspective, and we should, right? The work at the foundation and the work that we do is thoroughly committed to community wisdom and the lived experience, as I said earlier. But we must connect this work then to tools, right? Community development finance tools, that's what you're talking about. Having access to talented people, to capital and credit, an understanding of zoning and land use, what the rules are, how you affect the rules, that's the conversation, right? So whether you look at the CZO, right, that's now a living document, do we understand how to function within that space to continue to create opportunity from an equitable perspective? Are we building at foundations, through community banks and other spaces, the capitalization, the access to credit, and the relationships, because so much of this is relationships, right? And doing that in the context of understanding the first thing that Van said, we have a tremendous and rich and beautiful culture and legacy in this community. And we also have one of the country's largest economic disparities that has been created and perfected over 150 years. If you look at post-Reconstruction alone, and these are not things to say, to the Councilwoman's point, oh, woe is us, we can't make progress. It is just to understand what we're dealing with and where the opportunity exists for us to make those investments. I just wanted to lift that up because that's important.
But in addition to that, though, Flozell, it's not only having the tools, right, and providing those tools, but you have to do that where the people are. Because they have to have a real understanding of what those tools are. Right. So we can talk about it here, but until we literally touch those business owners in the community and those homeowners in the community, then I don't see us having a real impact. So it's the tools, but we have to do, there's no easy way to do a tough job.
That's right.
And to do that tough job is to get down with the people and literally provide them with the case management that they need. It's not here's the paperwork, but it's literally helping them complete the paperwork, you know, dot the I's, cross the T's, and that's what we've been missing. Right. And even for the small business grants and loans that were being provided through the state, through, you know, the whole little connected to the road home and all that didn't get off the ground, really. And even connecting that program with small rentals that never got off the ground. So this is what we're dealing with now when we look at our communities and you look at the fabric and you look at the blight. And then you do welcome reinvestment, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you create that balance, and that the tools will allow for that balance to happen.
I think you're right. We're going to have to rely on the community to help us.
Right. We need the community, and when I look out, right, and I don't see many African Americans in the room, it tells me, hey, the work has to hit the ground. So we can be here, and this is great, but we have a lot of work to do. And it has to also be within the community, if you understand. So that's my little 2 cents on that.
Well, that actually leads to a question I have, which is, what should government do? What policies does the city have? What policies should the city have? Or is this really, you know, is gentrification driven by the private sector? Should the response be grassroots?
Well, gentrification is driven by the market, and if we don't slow it down or provide incentives or policies, then hey, it's nothing you can do. And so where we are now is that we do need to talk about inclusionary zoning practices. We have a CZO that we just passed, but yet I can't tell you from my city administration, my city government, what our goals are as it relates to the CZO. We're having this conversation after we've passed. So we're late to the table, and you cannot do it without government, without the private sector, and the nonprofit. We all have to work together on this. That's what research has shown me. And hopefully we will get there. It comes to dealing with the NIF money that I just mentioned, getting that off the ground. We just had and heard conversations about the scatter sites of Hanno, right? And there was an uproar about that. Some people feel like they need to be sold at market. Are you kidding me?
Can you explain that a little bit? There was a story in the paper this weekend about that. There's a change in Hano's policy.
And
on
I
what
didn't even read all the paper. I was
You were quoted in
there,
it.
but I didn't. But
You talked about gentrification.
well, I know it did. But the issue is we have to have a plan to deal with those scattered sites within our communities, because right now it's starting to be the only piece of land that we know can be affordable.
So you're talking about either a vacant site or maybe a blighted site owned by Hano that might be in the Irish Channel or someplace like that.
Throughout the city, there are hundreds of them.
Okay.
And
And the idea is to turn those in, rather than sell them at market rate, to turn them into affordable.
To sell them at market, which will alleviate totally the affordability in a community. So I think that we have to, those are policies, those are procedures that we can do tied to government to ensure that balance is in place so that our communities can be redeveloped for everybody.
You know, LaToya, this brings up again, sounding like a broken record, but the need for a plan.
Yes.
Now, in New Orleans, we think plan is the other four-letter word, right? It's the new four-letter word. We've done it so many times, but it's really important because when you don't have a framework for those decisions, they get made willy-nilly. They get made based on whatever the political dynamic is at the time, or they get made on whatever is sort of financially expedient or whatever we can get done. But if you look at, there are some things that I think we can do and that take advantage of the public-private sector partnerships and working with nonprofits. The city just recently, in the last year, spent or invested some of its home resources on rentals alone. I think that hadn't happened in a long time. Developing some mixed income rental opportunities. I think there are chances for us to look at old school land banking, new school land trust. The Hano project would be a perfect opportunity to do something where the city can partner and create some opportunities for permanent affordability that are still market-based development but allow us to create affordability in those spaces and to really begin to look at how we capitalize some of the home ownership financing, because it's going to have to look different than what we've been doing. The home financing and the new market tax credit financing is changing dramatically. We won't be able to create home ownership opportunities the way we used to.
Can I just add something to that? But I do think it's also important that when we think about gentrification, and we have a tendency to always say, well, it's a market, it's a market-oriented process, and of course that's true. But if we start thinking about all these sources of funds, new markets, tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, historic preservation tax credits, as well as all the different processes that make development happen, it's not only kind of a market process. And in a sense, like there's always all this, public sector kind of contribution to it as well, as of course, the philanthropic community participating in different ways. And I think we need to claim that, like on the forefront, that that these kinds of change and redevelopment. I mean, I think the question of redevelopment is something that it happens through coalitions, and that's always the case. But that also means that we make requests. We say we need to do things differently, and work collaboratively rather than almost thinking like it's going to happen some way, and we can only make change around the edges.
Go on. I'm sorry.
I think that part of sometimes the private sector, the developers, along with some aspects of government, really make it harder for us to find a balance in our communities where we can possibly really talk about rent stabilization. Now, Neil Abramson, I don't know the process where the bill is in the House, but he sponsored a bill that said that the Orleans Parish School Board could sell the properties to private investors at a certain rate, a set rate, a what? A below market rate, and then allow them to sell those entities to private developers. And then those private developers have the right to then flip them again above market to possibly other developers or other people. So you have all of these school buildings that possibly will become centers of gentrification where there will be upscale apartments. They won't think about the balance of the neighborhood. But what it does is it's another example of why some of the residents, the low-income residents that have lived in these areas distrust government, distrust police, distrust all of those, because you have a caseworker or somebody come knock on the door, you'd be surprised if they even open it. You know, a lot of them, if you try to talk to them about estate planning, and maybe if somebody dies in your family, go and open and close succession, as opposed to having generations of people assuming these homes, and then when something happens like road home or something else, and then they go try to do something about it, and then this lawyer's like, well, I've got so much work to open this and close these successions. You've got this legal bill that's so high. You have all of these heirs that half of them are not going to sign off and give you control of the house because they're going to want a piece of the pocket. Then you've got years of taxes that are built on that the city never enforced to collect. So now it becomes adjudicated property, and you have all of these people waiting on the side, waiting for it to go up to sale. And they get it for little or nothing. And then you have issues where places like Rosenwald Center, Booker T, where they want to redevelop them, but it's on unquestionably toxic land. And no one's standing up and saying, this was already toxic land when they built it, and we don't know how much it's affected our people, and you're not going to listen, but you're going to redevelop it anyway for the same low economic residents? But yet, low economic residents have been given the okie doke, I love that saying, and have been given the lies and the distrust that these same people that had these, were forced into these very lucrative segregated societies where they did business with their own businesses. They had their own schools. That money stayed within the community. And then integration comes in, and then the money leaves the community, and the communities die. And when everything happened and was manipulated, they lost the trust in community. They lost trust in those that were supposed to protect them. So where do they go? How do they then believe that change is going to include them? I have a friend of mine that's here tonight, and she's a renter, and she lives in a night ward. And she said, well, what about us? She says, what about the renters? Where are we going to go? I see the gentrification happening all around. Where will I be able to afford to live? How can we answer those questions? That's what this group needs to think about. How do we answer those questions in the face of those people?
It's empowering them to have a voice in the process and in the change. Because without that, sitting on the sideline is sitting on the sideline, which then you become the okie doke. So there is no excuse for not participating. We have a responsibility to empower our people in our neighborhoods to play a part, because they deserve that, and there's a role for them to play. It is their community. And so I think we have to change, we have to turn the map around. And even go back to 10 years ago where people stood up and said, hey, not my neighborhood, boo. You know, so we really have to keep that drive alive and give our people hope, because without hope, you can forget about it. And it's within. I believe that.
Thank you so much. Before we go to questions, I just want to address quickly the flip side of this, which is we talked a lot about Native New Orleanians, people, lower income people who are trying to stay in their neighborhoods. What about the newcomers, though? What about, you know, Renya's study was really interesting. She interviewed a lot of people who came to New Orleans to be part of the recovery and not to change it, but to participate in it. What's the message to them? What can they do to help this process?
Well, first of all, thank you. Hey, reinvesting in the city of New Orleans, we cannot do it alone. So we're all in this together. And if we are in it together, then we will ensure that residents, people who live in our neighborhood that we've invested in, play a role in the redevelopment of that community. And I've seen that. But I've also seen, well, oh, now the horns are too loud coming down the street. Well, that's an issue. So people move to New Orleans for the culture. And you don't change the culture, you become a part of it. So the attitude, it has to be right, meaning you're not coming to change, you're actually coming to change who you are and then grow and live within. That was the way that I did it when I moved to New Orleans. And you tell me, New Orleans is a part of my soul, Jack. Mm-hmm. And then I have a child too. It's like foreign because you have a baby and you tell me I'm not from New Orleans. Yeah, right. And then but the bottom line is we all have a role to play. And I think I can be even that example. And many of us here who were not born here, but hey, we do just as much, and put our blood, sweat, and tears in the work that we do, not because of ourselves, but because of the communities that we live in. Mm-hmm. And so my neighborhood of Broadmoor, when I invested in that community, I knew I was moving into the area where the needs were the greatest. On Louisiana Avenue Parkway, still the greatest needs there. In that Census Tract 103. But the thing is, it wasn't coming in. I wanted to change the fabric, but for the people who live there. And I think it's our intentions, how we come, and the values that all of us have to uphold in the communities in which we live. Gentrification was in the redevelopment plan of Broadmoor, we put it up there front and center, that everyone had the right to return, and we would ensure that that happened. But we sold the values of the community to where you see the change, but you also see people who've bought into the community who've embraced those values. And that's what we want. We have to create communities for everybody. That's a healthy community. It's a public health issue, just as is smoking.
Yeah.
I mean, Flozell, you grew up in, the heart of what's now the Ferret Corridor, I think probably right around where Cure is, right? What's it like to go back and see it?
So I'll tell you a quick story, and I think this goes directly to your question. Not long after Katrina, thankfully I worked at Tulane, so I had my job and was able to secure my family. And I grew up, I'm the son of a 16-year-old, first-generation kid, amazing woman, and my grandmother. So I was born into my grandmother's house in that neighborhood, and I wanted to come back and own that property, right? I'm lucky enough to have a good job. I know a thing or two about business, had an MBA by then, and thought, I'm going to do what people do once they make it, right? And I missed the opportunity. I made a bid on the property 2 weeks after someone else did. Turns out to be someone who I knew from grad school. A guy was not from here, got financed through his dad's real estate company. Didn't have to go through the things I had to go through to make sure I could compete. And it was just a reminder for me. One, I was just really sad that I missed the opportunity. But then as I've seen that neighborhood change and evolve and grow, and I still spend lots of time there, it's also a reminder for me of the lost opportunity, right? So I'm not building wealth. I have nothing to leave to my children in that space that would have grown equity, that would have been allowed me to talk about the legacy of that community, my family, and the others who raised me, and what it meant to get me here. And that's the story that I hear time and time again. And so for new people, I think New Orleans has always been home. People move here largely because they immediately feel welcome. And that's what we do. It would be great if they would consider some intentionality about thinking about the neighborhoods they move into and really being a part of these policy conversations to say we too want neighborhoods that are diverse and that create opportunity intentionally. We want to invite new people not just to the city, not just to the new great jobs that they're getting and the wonderful expensive restaurants that are opening that I frequently go to myself. But we also want to invite them to the fight for a community and a fight for people, the people in this community. If you want to be a New Orleanian, fight for us.
That's right.
That's what we want. Yeah.
You know, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm so happy that gentrification is starting in the 7th Ward. I really am. Something's getting done. And if that was the impetus, then great. All I really want is to stand up and say, anyone that comes into that culture, that comes into that area, learn the history, learn the culture, learn what is a rich fabric of what makes New Orleans what it is. And if you do that, and you're going to find so many commonalities, you're going to realize that there were so many ethnicities that have gone through and raised up in that area. You'll find one. I'm so happy to be here. I feel like I'm amongst my people in this center because my great-grandfather was a French-Polish Jew from the Alsace-Lorraine region of France. His name was Lovinsky Vokerson. But even with that, you had all of these different ethnicities that settled and contributed. And there was so much. You know, I laugh and I chuckle every time I go to a second line nowadays.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Lord have mercy. Mike is live.
I laugh and chuckle because I remember back in the day, you know, that wasn't the safest place to be. Am I lying?
Come on.
That wasn't the safest place to be. When the Indians would come out at Hunter's Field in the 7th Ward on St. Joseph's Day, that wasn't the safest place to be. There was a lot of violence. They were serious about their culture, and a lot of machetes would come out under them Indian suits, and people would go to charity. But I chuckle now. I'm like, I see so many different ethnicities who are not only sitting on the sidelines of the second lines, they're marching in the second lines. I mean, I've seen more Jewish people know how to buck jump. That's why I know them sons of David got a little soul. But not only that, I'm starting to see people drumming who are not African American. I'm now hearing that there are non-African Americans sewing the suits for the Indians. I'm hearing that these cultures, these people are coming in and they're absorbing it. And actually, I'm thankful because this culture may just survive because the younger generations of African Americans and the Creoles of culture don't care. And maybe this may make them take notice. And we have a number of people in the city who are actually of the Creole culture, but they abandoned it years ago. When the Americans moved in alongside the French, they questioned, why you call yourself a Creole? They got all these people of color that are Creole, so what you trying to say? So they stopped using the term. So now we've got generations of people like Haydel's Bakery, and there's a Heidel of relative in the room, and you're going to tell me those two descendants of the German Heidel, H-E-I-D-E-L, aren't related somewhere? But you won't have that other family say that they're Creole when they are. But it's about the culture and not the ethnicities and how it's been twisted over time. I hope that we can regrow at least that aspect of the culture and know that it's inclusive. It's not about color. It's not about the skin color, light skin and the brown bag like they did in the 7th Ward, because that was a mirror of a society that was segregated. It includes white French Creoles as well as dark-skinned Creoles. We have to get them to accept their culture so that it can live and prosper. And when it does, that community, my community, the 7th Ward, will prosper through education of the history and the culture of the people.
Right now?
There's, you know, thinking about what everybody else has said, there's a few things that sort of keep coming to mind. And one is this question of, you know, sort of the tools and how we use them, and now thinking of zoning and things like non-conforming uses. So neighborhoods change, of course, but coming into a neighborhood and deciding it should be different. And so the commercial properties are along St. Bernard, and then it becomes harder to open a business. It becomes if some kind of local or neighborhood kind of bar or music venue closes, it's hard for the next, you know, person who owns it to get a license for live music and I think we need to be very critical of that, of like assuming that somehow we should be phasing out non-conforming uses. And that's a very practical thing, but it comes up in a lot of really, neighborhood scale conflicts, and I think we really do need to rethink how we think about that. And is non-conforming actually the right framework? Maybe we should talk about compatibility and say, how do we, make different things work in our neighborhoods instead of assuming that there's some place we need to go that's like different or more residential. So that's one area. But another couple things that came up that I think are really important to think about, and one is some of these less visible aspects of like building opportunity and certainly part of that, we see it in neighborhoods. That is about home ownership. It is about family wealth, but it's also about being like advocates for getting politically engaged with different kinds of economic development. Are we really building a city that's built on opportunity? And if we are, if you're coming into an area and you say, well, I don't want to be the person who's really making someone worse off, but I'm just moving into this neighborhood because I can afford it. And really thinking about, hey, how do you understand these areas you're living in and what needs to happen? And it may not be something as visible as what's going on that block that needs to happen, and making sure that you're part of that discussion and understand like what it is how your neighbors are living, the different things they're facing. We have, something that's very invisible, although it's happening all over. It's just like how much discrimination there is against people who are formerly incarcerated, and and we need to care about that, but we don't see it all the time, unless, of course, it's your family member or you who's living with it, and you see it all the time. And that would be, I think, the one last thing I would say about this, that I think it becomes, for people sort of who are newcomers or for people who are, if we think about gentrification, one thing, one of our, something we might be seeing is that this is who we're trying to rebuild cities for, these newcomers, people who are better off, and it's a question of priorities. And of course, that we all say, like, hey, I want this or I don't want that, and when those issues come up, we're vocal about it. But that may unintentionally shift priorities in a neighborhood. And one issue that's come up, and I must say that, and I will state up front, I like dogs. I am not saying that I don't believe in dog parks. But I am actually a little surprised at some of the discussions that sometimes that we're having. And I'm hearing comments that I think people are caring more about dog parks than they're caring about parks for kids.
Yep.
And I find that confusing. And so I think that in some of this, that it becomes a question of priorities, that we say that sometimes we say, hey, what do I want in my neighborhood? But we really have to do that work to say, hey, what do all my neighbors need in the neighborhood as well? And be part of that discussion and not just thinking about what makes a city work for me or my friends or my community. And I think that is something that as kind of newcomers or potential gentrifiers need to be mindful of, because that discussion, because sometimes, in all these different ways, through market mechanisms, through all these things, sometimes like the interests of these newcomers are being reflected, in actions more than long-term residents, and we have to actively guard against that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a terrific place to stop and go to questions. Thank you all very much. This has been fantastic. And I hate to stop you, but I know you all have a lot to say. Greg, you want to? We have a couple microphones. Greg LaRose, back in the corner, has one. Gabe Feldman, who's making his way into the back, will have the other. And I think we're going to try to take a couple questions at a time so we can get a lot of people's points of view. So let's start.
Okay. There is one color that matters, and it's green. And investors don't, I'm all about the culture, but I'm afraid of outsiders just seeing the bottom line. And, locals want redevelopment, but, we want locally owned. We don't want, Donnie Rouse, Mr. Local, well, he's making the mid-city thing. He's giving it to, like, Walgreens or CVS, whatever. We want smart rebuilding, I guess. We don't want to be priced out. And then, again, with the city, I'm all for the city making, like Hano properties and school properties affordable for the living and all that. But we also got to remember, like, the history, like when New Orleans East went all Section 8, and that ruined the whole neighborhood. And certain legislatures, legislators made money off of it, and I'm not going to go into the whole library thing, but there's a whole lot of accountability that needs to be, we expect from city council, from the zoning, and we just don't want, we want to stay local, I think. That's all I want to say. Don't mind big box stores, just limit them. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, I have a sort of question or comment directed to the panel. I'm a member of various social organizations across the city, ranging across the entire socio-economic and racial pattern. And this is a conversation that goes on. I want to share with everyone and get your thoughts on it. That the reason we are having the gentrification in the city, and this conversation also goes on the upper end with some of my business owners and real estate friends, is that they don't want the low-income people back. It is better for them to be gone, and that way they can buy up the land and recalibrate the city as the way they want it. Because members of our government also has ties to these developers who also get money from that. So there's all these talking points we're getting about how we want the low-income people back. That's very nice for us to hear, but in the city, on the street level, they don't believe that, and we know what's really going on is they don't want them back because it's better for the people to come in and come into the Bywater and come into the Maroney, who can actually bring in tax dollars for the city. So all the talk of having the low-income people back, we know they're not going to do that. This is a hospitality city. Education is not validated because everyone gets educated, they're not moving out, and no one's going to work in the hotels. So can we get some honest talk from government, some transparency to see who are members of the current administration, what political and what business dealings are they dealing with? If we're seeing ABC Corporation is buying up land in the Maroney, we see Council Member Smith, I'm not going to name any names, also has their hands in this certain development to get those exposed. And then we'll really see change once we get the transparency. But fortunately, we all know New Orleans politics is too corrupt for that to actually ever happen.
So you doomed all the way.
Okay, one more back in the corner, and then we'll.
Yeah, so my question, actually, my biggest fear walking into here was that it was going to be a room filled of white people. And my question is, this is the speaker series, so I'm hoping there's more talks. Why are we not having these talks in parts of the city that are being gentrified? I'm talking about Bywater, Maroney, Treme, Central City, St. Roch. Why are we not in those communities? Why are we having this conversation uptown by Tulane?
Are we gonna answer any of these questions?
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Now we're okay.
I know we got this gentleman here and then this lady.
No, we're okay. Who would like to take on any of those?
Well,
Start there. The first one I should say, Flozell, you are having this conversation this weekend in Central City, so.
Right, and so, I'm going to try to do speed round answers because there is a lot to say. There is a power analysis that one has to have about how things happen and why they happen. I think the gentleman's question gets to the notion of power and wealth and how it gets, I'll say, managed in America. This is an American problem, and it manifests itself in the city the same way it does, except we have arguably some different cultural norms. And so we have to be able to understand these issues, whether or not there's a conspiracy. The question is, do we have an analysis? Do we understand how power moves? And are we going to develop strategies that answer the questions we want answered? It is not going to be good enough for us to say, this is happening, I suspect this is happening, I see this happening. We are going to have to come together. And I swear you're going to think I'm just trying to push this plan, but I'm not. But we have to come together to create solutions where we can then say, Councilwoman Cantrell, Mayor Landrieu, the banks, the philanthropy, right? Researchers and policy people, the business community. Here's what we're going to do. Are you on board with us or not? Like, this is how we're going to move this conversation. So I just think we have to give a lot more thought to that. And your question about, we believe in having multiple meetings all over the city. We'd be glad to help host one.
We actually had some. It wasn't intended for that. I know in the Liverpool-Claiborne corridor study, in that neighborhood, they had all these breakout sessions and meetings. It was about what to do with the overpass, and it was really about the community and gentrification coming in. A lot of conversations happened. But when the residents trusted to come out and give their say, they left not hearing anything else. they left they had maybe 1 or 2 follow-ups, and you give and give and give the information that they want, we're still waiting to see what are I know the network was formed by the city, which it was the name change, and they're working on some things in there, and Ashley Gardier is doing a fantastic job addressing a lot of things. But those people on the ground in those neighborhoods who have already years of distrust of the government and of the city and of the council people, not our current council. I think our current council has done a lot. If you've ever seen some of those meetings, they fight. And I give LaToya a lot she doesn't take much stuff. But what happens when we have a council meeting and an issue comes up and none of our residents feel that their voice is going to be heard, but yet when Cafe Habana is coming into Esplanade and Rampart, that council chamber was packed. And trust me, wasn't a black face in there. So it's all about if we can get our people, especially the black residents of the city, feeling that they have the power to actually make a difference. They can do it economically. We can stop spending our money in certain places if we can get enough people to do it. We can stop patronizing certain things. We can protest peaceably, hopefully without the police thinking, oh my God, here's a gang of blacks, they're gonna burn and start attacking them like they did in Baltimore, where they didn't do anything to the bikers. Anyway, I ain't gonna say that.
I agree totally with what's been said, but I did want to hit on the stay local issue, which really speaks to the need for incentives for our businesses to be able to thrive. Because Van spoke to this issue as well. As a small business in the city, without access to real capital, it makes it very difficult. I had this conversation today, actually driving along Magazine Street with the development happening on Magazine in Nashville. That's outside of my area, but the guy is developing things throughout the city. But the issue came down to, and I was saying, look, we don't want a lot of these, national retails. What I'm hearing from the community, particularly, along Magazine Street, not for big box. It is, the fabric is local. But in order for development to occur, it costs money. It does. But with incentives in place, you can balance that and you can keep the areas local and allow for our small businesses to thrive, which requires us, government, your private sector, and even your nonprofit sector to come together to create these incentives. And even the NIF money that I was talking about could be used to help drive that. You mentioned the Hano properties, and I know across the country we've just done public housing wrong. It was a horrible, horrible experiment, unfortunately. And majority of African Americans and those, were impacted greatly and severely by that and still are. But with that, it gave Section 8 a bad rap. And particularly in our city where we allowed slumlords to thrive and make the money. It really gave people the perception that the folks who live there are on Section 8, when that's not the truth. So, but we did it wrong. And so I think we have to change the map around, again, turn it around, and create quality housing for people and give them tools that they need to live and thrive in a neighborhood that they deserve. Now, in regards to the conspiracies with government, hey, but I can't change where your mind is on that. I really can't. And I'm not going to try to. But what I will say is that if you get involved and you really do learn, I would say, and as Flozell was saying, how power is distributed and how it does impact all of our quality of lives. And you see even the 1%, and talk about national, that 1%, it's real. And we think that there's this gradual decline, but it's not. It's almost a cliff. That 1%, bam, and then it stretches out. So we're all suffering. But I don't think blaming government is the answer. I think holding government accountable. That is the key. You can run for office too. You can. And hey, I've done it before. Not just, hey, by the grace of God, winning when I ran the first time. But I ran for school board in '04 and lost, but it was because I wanted to be a part of something good. And I'm still paying debt from that doggone election right now. But because I stood up for what I believed in, I will do that. I will continue to do that. And I will also say, I feel you. The way that the disaster was framed post-Katrina, it did send the message that New Orleans was not going to be rebuilt for poor people. That this was the opportunity, hey, clean slate. That was the message. I felt it when I was displaced in Houston. When you heard on the radio and hearing in the media, your folks are in your city, they're raping each other and they're shooting each other, only 10 years later to find out that was a lie. So all of that was a part of the framing. But don't believe it. We have to be a part of the change. And I know that you can be a part of the change. And hey, you can come intern in my office, I have some here, and you can be a part, and you can see from the inside that what I do, hey, no hidden agenda. Public records, hey, finance disclosure, online. So you can track that, but don't condemn people all saying that everyone's corrupt because, hey, I don't think we would be here and this city wouldn't be back if that were the case.
Can I hold it? It makes me feel comfortable if I hold it myself. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for this discussion. It's important, but I want to also start out by a quote from Adam van Bismarck. He said that law policies are like sausages. You never see them get made. But
I was going to ask that. Is that true, Vance?
Love that. I think that this is a great panel, and I want to kind of echo some of the stuff that Flozell been talking about. As a little boy, I grew up in the public housing, the St. Bernard. I'm from the 7th Ward as well, but from the other side. But one of the things that when we think about when public housing was torn down, we still have a lot. You're exactly right, and it's unfortunate we went to two of the same schools, UNO and Tulane as well. And at Tulane, in the Sustainable Real Estate Development Program, they taught about people, planet, and profit. People, planet, and profit. But when you look at the huge economic disparities across this city and look at the food deserts, as you look at the Lower Ninth Ward and various other different things that's going on and around in the city. And in order to get back to the financing, when we talked about new market tax credits, in 2011, which was the 2012 fiscal year, they had 7 firms in New Orleans received over $257 million in new market tax credits. How I know? Because I'm a community development entity certified by the CDFI fund. So I know but looking at most of those entities that received these $257 million in new market tax credit, when this legislation was written under the Community Tax Relief Act of 2000 under Bill Clinton, he went to the Congressional Black Caucus and said, I want to bring investment capital into low-income communities. This is a tool that we can use, and we're going to create these tax policies and things of that nature. But they've been skirting the law. They've been skirting the law, and Barney Frank issued the report written by the Government Accountability Office in 2009, ensuring that this capital is not hitting those with the legislative intent of the program. So my question is, from a local perspective, we give out tax abatements, we give out pilots, we give out all these other different tax incentives to developers in the city of New Orleans. How could we make sure that developers who are receiving these tax credits or these different tax financial tools, whether it's tax increment financing, making sure that they're doing what they say they're going to do and keeping affordability in our communities?
Okay, thank you for that. One or two others?
So I really love the fact that I heard the word intentionality come up a couple of times. I live downtown, but I work uptown. I work on Frett Street. And whenever I bike to work, every day that I bike to work, I see where things are not intentional. When people say that the market drives development, it's a hogwash. I've seen policies in so many different levels. I've seen different entities, such as speaking to the brother over there who mentioned in terms of thinking about new market tax credits. I've seen affordable housing be developed for artists who are primarily not from here or who have lived here for a very short amount of time. I know someone who like moved here and within 6 months got affordable housing, despite the fact that the person makes lots of money. And so I'm not hating on individuals, because I feel like people come to a place and they misunderstand the place. But I think in terms of intentionality, I think the whole case management piece that you, Councilmember Cantrell, mentioned is very important. Like, you know, there are people who are getting things very easily, and yet our city government isn't teaching people like, you know, little Jojo who lives on the corner who wants to open up a clothing store how to do it. I feel like this is a place where government needs to be at, not the nonprofit realm.
Okay, one more.
Okay. I guess my question is a little joint here, but I heard Councilwoman talking about how people need hope, and people need to feel empowered. And then also I hear Mr. Vance talking about, you seem to be at least a little happy about some of the, let's call it cultural inclusion of some of the non-locals into that, because the local kids don't care about their culture. And yet I also hear you have a wealth of knowledge, and I know you went to Morehouse, so I know you know all about the long history of underrepresentation of certain demographics of people, and how that underrepresentation is intentional. And I'm asking, how do you reconcile the view of people need to feel more empowered, people need to be more involved, people need to be more at these meetings and doing these things, when the opportunities and the infrastructure that is supposed to be the result of that hope is not there? I work in the film industry, and I see in a city that is predominantly black in facing an issue that negatively targets predominantly black neighborhoods, and not only do we have a room that is predominantly white, but the film industry and the people who work here are not only predominantly white, but predominantly out of town. So how can you ask people to have that hope, to feel that empowerment, when the opportunities are not there that is supposed to feed that hope and is supposed to sustain that empowerment? What do you do there when you have a bigger wealth disparity between black Americans and white Americans in this city than you had in South Apartheid South Africa? How do you reconcile those ideas?
I think one of the problems that we have in this is that we have a generation that has been afforded education from some of their hardworking parents, went on to get advanced degrees, and have gone on to middle class, upper middle class, or more, with the same knowledge that you said. A lot of Morehouse men I know. I'm the only one in this room. Could be more. But the thing is, these same people, when they talk about where they come from in the old neighborhoods, I'm not going to quote Chris Rock, but they say, I love black people. And you know the rest. When they start saying the same things that you're hearing in other rooms that may be in the back rooms in uptown New Orleans, there's a disconnect, because that group, that demographic that gets the education, that has the familial connections to reach back and go and talk to their younger cousins and their younger generation and educate them, they're not doing it. Not in mass. And there's some that are working. You got a lot of people. Like, the thing I like about Steve, Steve will show up at every community meeting, the ones that I've been a part of. Yeah. And he'll be a voice. And he'll challenge everybody. Yeah. And he came from the St. Bernard. They got a lot of guys that came from public housing. Ike Spears came out of the Desire. And Ike Spears has done a lot to help the underprivileged and those incarcerated and everything. But we have to wonder, how many of us in that demographic are actually going back in the neighborhood? When there's gentrification and we have the wherewithal to invest, because we have the money, why don't we invest? Why don't we create that mixture? Why aren't we believing in our own history, in our own people?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it makes you feel almost a little disingenuous. As knowing that, yeah, there are people like us in this room right now doing all we can, but there's also a segment of us that are not doing anything. Just like of every other demographic, there's some that are involved and some that aren't. But the amount of us that are capable of being involved, I think a good number are, but there's just not enough of us. And the policies and the access to that infrastructure is not to the level to allow enough of us to
Right.
change the voice.
But here, so I think you're right. There is a constant tension between what you're talking about and the responsibility that the councilwoman mentioned earlier. At the end of the day, there are such dramatic disparities that to fix it, people are going to have to build their power. And the way we exercise power in this space is going to have to be political. That is one of the advantages we have. You can be broke as you want, and you can still vote. And so we're going to have to really think about how we engage people and how we really make the space for folks to participate, to build power that allows us to have influence on these things. I also want to just be crystal clear about this, and Rania, you mentioned this earlier. There are a set of systems designed to create inequity. This is not, right. Oh, I just want us to be clear about that, right? So when we talk about access to capital, when we talk about the criminal justice system, we've had people say, why are you guys working on that stuff? That's not economic opportunity. You think not? Right? When you talk about real estate development and all of these things, I see Fair Housing is in the room, right, Max? They have a report that showed specifically that there is still tremendous bias in just being able to rent a place. So we're not just talking about, do you have the money? When you have the money and you show up with this skin, you still can't get in. That's a thing. Restaurant Opportunity Center showed us just last year, right? That for good paying restaurant jobs, not like you say, the cook or the chef, but $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year jobs, overwhelming discrimination. And so again, it's not a woe is me sort of analysis. It is, we have work to do. We can build power, I think, both politically and through relationships and through policy to deal with structural issues, and work through our relationships to deal with personal and community issues.
Okay. Rania? Yeah.
That I would also, just the one thing I would say is I do think that part of that accountability is looking at things like these, public sector programs, like new markets, tax credits, and really looking where that money is going and what it's doing. Because I do think that, like a lot of, kind of what we're seeing is it's true that there's, there's a little wiggle room there, and there's people who are very sophisticated taking advantage of it and really saying that, like, that's all of us being accountable and saying that, that we have to, really be kind of dismantling these systems that, produce inequality and being very active in doing that.
Okay. Next. Is that forward to you? I'm sorry, LaToya, are you? Yeah.
Well, okay. I was going to speak to, I think Stephen mentioned the 7 development firms that got the money, and which just really mirrors, even in this post-Katrina environment, when we talked about FEMA dollars, when we talked about federal money coming through the state, it was divvied up the same way, which was totally unfair and created huge disparities. And that's unacceptable. So we do have to question not only government, but also we have to drive and change policy. And so I would say we have to do this together. And we're working on something now. You and I, we've been talking about many different things, including, the DBE piece. I mean, there are so many areas that we have to focus to ensure that things are equitable. And we're not there yet. We have a lot of work to do.
Okay, thank you. Next, Gabe? Yeah. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name's Craig Morse. I'm a local artist and photographer with a background in sustainable urban planning and design. My family's lived in the New Orleans area since 1986. And one of the things I've been concerned, one of the questions that I've often been asked by people from out of town of why I live in New Orleans is, it is one of the last, if not the only, remaining example of living art, history, and culture in the United States. It's not a place you come to primarily to go to the museums because the history and culture is alive on the streets. It's right there in front of you, and you have the choice or not to engage in it. My question probably goes mostly to you, Councilwoman Cantrell. Is there at all the possibility to create a legally enforceable and binding document, a charter of such, that basically defines the nature of New Orleans and what we want it to continue to be?
Well, I think that kind of speaks. Did you want to take it? That really seems to speak to the master planning process that the city went through about 9 years ago, in which it will be opening back up towards the end of this year to continue to revision the city of New Orleans and its fabric that talks not only about the housing piece, but also the culture as well. And that was embedded in the citywide master plan that was by charter. It was a vote of the people, and which made it law, and now the city council had to ensure that the comprehensive zoning ordinance was aligned with that chartered document. So I think that absolutely we can continue those conversations as it relates to that citywide master plan. That is the tool, that's the charter.
Yeah. I don't mean to colorize this argument any more than it has to be, but I grew up in New York, and I've seen a lot of gentrification go down. And in Ta-Nehisi Coates' award-winning essay, where he kind of said gentrification is like the modern landmark of, disenfranchising Black people and Black wealth. I'm curious to know if there's any places or movements in New Orleans or Louisiana that are looking at reparations for Black people in terms of like the labor they put into the city and the state, and really, giving it back to the communities that have earned it, who've like not been able to have their stake. And I know this is like, this gentrification topic is a city small thing, but I mean, without looking at the big issue, I feel like, ideally we want to live in a segregated world. I'm sorry, yeah, integrated world, excuse me.
I'm about to say, I don't know, that's not me now.
We know what you meant.
I mean, it's just painful to see that, Black Americans, we really struggle to have our community. Every time we do get somewhere, it's at risk. Harlem's gone. Treme is on the way, Not to say I love the neighbors I have in Treme. I don't know. It's just something that I would like to envision in this country, is just like safe, strong Black communities that are there to support, Black achievement. Yeah.
Well, I want to see the same thing. I want to see the same thing, and it also speaks to comments that Vance was made just about the personal responsibility of people who have also benefited from their parents that through the movement, civil rights movement. I mean, come on. But when I go to communities and I dispatch, even today, Charles Ellis, my sheriff, we started to have this beautification thing going on in District B, where offenders in municipal and traffic court are sentenced to community service and assigned to my office. My sheriff then oversees them in the community, paying their debts to society. And right now we've logged about 75 hours, which is great. But what he said to me was that we're having people out there cleaning up, but people in their own community sitting down, throwing trash on the ground when someone else is there picking it up. We have to change the map around here. Now I hear you on reparations, but you know what? I am ready for our communities to empower and to feel it within, because it is there. But it's not about what someone else has done at this point. I understand the systematic piece, all that, racism, systemic racism, all of that. But I do believe that we're at a point within our communities where we've seen our people transform themselves, their lives, and their families for decades. So it can be done. But I want to empower folks in the community to give a damn about their own neighborhood. Because that's something that we will have to do.
Okay.
Right.
No, that's a part of it, and we have touched on that, but that's one piece of the equation. I just like to look at it holistically and also see ourselves in transformation. Fighting for reparations? No, I don't. Maybe
I think we want to try to get to.
I don't know.
There actually are some folks, I can't remember just yet, but I can make a connection. In pre-Katrina, there was a strong movement among both grassroots scholars, grassroots members, and Afrocentric scholars and others that were looking at reparations. I'm a bit of an amateur Civil War historian, and I have
post-Katrina?
Some friends of mine.
I know pre-Katrina, but I don't know if
I don't know if they're still around. We need to check, but I know there's some folks looking at the issue. I think you mentioned Ta-Nehisi's piece, and what was so important about that piece, I think. My point was that my friends joke that if we go to the reparations discussion, it's the next Civil War, right? So I think there's this conversation that we struggle, I think, between what's practical and what's right sometimes. I think, though, the piece, and if you guys have not read Ta-Nehisi Coates' piece in The Atlantic, it is a seminal historic piece on the analysis of housing and wealth creation and the role of public policy and what America has done to invest public money to create housing wealth and advantages in ways that have created disparity and disenfranchisement. And again, history informs the future. It really gives us, I think, some sense that we can also use public policy in the investment of public resources, leveraging private resources, and the amazing strength and wisdom of people, those folks that you guys are talking about in the neighborhoods who are just shoring themselves up anyway, to really be able to make some of the progress that we're looking for.
We have time really just for a couple more questions, so let's try to take them together. Let's start with Gabe back here.
Hi, I'm a social worker, and I have two questions, and I'm going to talk as fast as I can. The first thing about the movie industry, I've seen the movie industry price people out by neighborhood. How are we having any discussions about Airbnb not pricing out neighbors? And we're seeing it happening in New York. It's kind of happening in Chicago. The second question, mental health isn't being talked about. Also, my friends are losing jobs as we speak in the mental health field due to gender, but why are there so many chronically homeless people out there and that they need housing?
Hi. Really quick, I'm over here, sorry. Yonder. Hi. You keep mentioning empowering folks, and one way that I think would be really important talking about renters is tenants' rights. I don't know how many people in this room have ever faced eviction in this city, but I have. You get the notice, there's no one who's gonna help you, and you're out the door unless you cut a deal with your landlord and give them more money, who is also a slumlord. I was evicted from this apartment. It is now on Airbnb for $200 a night. This is a serious problem in many neighborhoods. You have people renting out 8 or 9 entire apartments on Airbnb. Have they ever moved them from the housing market? And it's driving up rents even more. And there needs to be serious public policy discussions about it, and that has been largely absent from the conversation.
Before we get to answers in that, I want to mention that the last big issue forum we had here was on Airbnb. And it is, perhaps we can post it on the Facebook page online if it's not there already. So keep an eye on that, because it was a good discussion about that. But
well, in Airbnb, of course, it's an issue, and I've been quoted to say that I do believe that it's contributing to the high rents that we are seeing In addition to that, evictions, because it's happening, it happened to you, but the evictions are even happening for those landlords to increase and collect higher rents that are not necessarily Airbnb. There have been policy discussions around it at the city council level. Councilmember Head and I are leading that effort, hopefully to introduce some legislation around it. We definitely have to create some level of balance, but they're, collecting resources and not paying any taxes on that. We are a destination city, so we have to address this issue. As it relates to, I think she said the mental health, but then there was another piece.
Mental health.
Oh, the mental health. Yeah, the mental health piece. I mean, absolutely.
And the movie industry pricing people out of the neighborhood.
With, with our governor, he's done a number on the city of New Orleans, state of Louisiana. I have a cousin who's with me who just, committed herself 2 weeks ago in order to get the right medical cocktail, I call it, to feel stabilized. When yet I was responding to her call about 3 weeks ago telling me that she was going to kill herself. So, hey, it hits me right at home. And not only that, being at two funerals last week with Miss Michelle, who killed herself and, of course, killed her 2 children. So it is serious, and we do have to find a way to address it holistically, but we still have the state legislature that's in session, where we know that our university medical center right now is not going to receive adequate funding as well. So we have to advocate, and I'm doing it in my role, but it's just not at the city level. It's at the state level as well, but also speaks to the need to grow our tax base. That speaks to the redevelopment of our communities, but doing it in a fashion that it is balanced, that meets the needs of all of our people, including the mentally ill, as well as our growing homeless population. I spoke earlier about Charles overseeing our citizens cleaning up, and it was raining, so our place is going underneath the Callio, Expressway, where he had to identify a dead body this afternoon, where people were just walking around him, didn't really understand that he was lifeless. So this issue is real, and it's something that we all have to be a part of, creating and pushing policy, but solutions to it.
Anybody else on that? I think we should probably wrap it up. We're getting on 2 hours, and this has been a great discussion. I know people want to keep talking. You're all still here, which is fantastic. One place to keep talking, I think, Flozell has some information about the meeting on Saturday. You want to repeat it? Or?
Yeah, I really encourage you guys to come out and get engaged, not only to participate, but to hold us accountable as well. For the inaugural Housing NOLA Summit Housing Conversation, it's going to be at historic A.L. Davis Park in Central City at Washington and LaSalle from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. this Saturday. And we really hope everyone can come out and invite other folks as well, organizations and people who care about these issues.
And I will just add that in passing the comprehensive zoning ordinance, I pushed an inclusionary ordinance to committee, which means that it will be publicly vetted at the Community Development Committee of the City Council. And that was done for a reason, to ensure that we bring people out and we show government that you all are very much focused on this issue, but that not only you're focused, but you want some resolve. You want to see action. And let's walk the talk.
Okay.
It will be, more than likely, it will either be the last meeting in June or the first in July. I'll let you know. You know you'll know. But we need to turn it out.
If you let us know, we can post it on the Facebook page as well. And again, thank you all. Many ways to stay involved. Please do. Thank you, panelists. It's been terrific. Thank you all for coming. And hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Doc.